All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Different Than College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here, our 2023 preview and prediction for the Louisville Cardinals. Look at this coaching staff. Big offseason for the Cardinals. Scott Satterfield unexpectedly leaves to Cincinnati late in the coaching cycle. Jeff Brom, though, homegrown kid, played here, and he's now coaching here once again. You know, a couple years ago, at the end of the 2018 season, he had an opportunity after spending his first 2 years at Purdue to come to his home school. Passed up the job the first time. Him and his son, though, they arrive here the second. You know, Brian Brom, he was a quarterback at Louisville in the late 2000s under his dad. He was a second-round pick in 2008. So there is plenty of lineage with these guys in this program. This is pretty cool, Nick. You know, Brian has been the OC ever since he became a coach in 2016. That's a pretty big responsibility that his dad just gave him right away to be a co-offensive coordinator. A lot of responsibilities here. These guys have some strong offensive minds, though, at the end of the day. I think this is really cool, though, Nick. This is going to be great for these two guys coming back home. This is now going to be their program. This is emotional. They clearly have a big, special, strong bond. This is awesome to see them return to Louisville. You know, what are your expectations? And what are your thoughts on this revampment here by Louisville? Because I think even though they lost Scott Satterfield, who was actually putting together a nice recruiting class, in the end, I think this is a much better outcome for them as a program.
Very interesting to see what happened at Louisville. All right, Scott Satterfield was putting together a great class, including a 5-star running back, the highest ever recruit on offense for Louisville at that time. He ended up ultimately removing his commitment and going to Texas A&M. And Jeff Brom comes in here. I think this is the right move for him and right move for the program. Obviously, great ties to the program. Grew up in Louisville, went to high school at Trinity High School in the city, played college football. His son played college football, quarterbacks coach, assistant head coach, passing game coordinator, assistant head coach, offensive coordinator, a couple different roles throughout a 5-year period, and then he went on and found himself involved in different roles as quarterback coach at FAU, Illinois, UAB, Western Kentucky, before being the head coach of Western Kentucky and Purdue, and now heads to Louisville here to kind of coach a program that is really heading in the right direction. They've continued to build solid recruiting classes, and they made a ton of portal work this offseason and really revamped this offense, as well as did some work on this defense, which was a pretty good defense under Satterfield. They produced a lot of nice talent in the NFL draft in recent years.
Ron English will be the defensive coordinator, replacing Brandon Brown. Spent past 2 seasons at Purdue, so this is a staff that he is well familiar with. Brom takes over an offense last year that certainly did not exceed expectations by any means, only 27 points per game. Really struggled to throw the ball, even though they did put up 201 on the ground. Malik Cunningham and crew really was just not a good unit overall. A lot of disappointment there from Louisville, but now things are completely different. They lost 11 players in the portal, added 15. This portal class they put together, Nick, is absolutely ridiculous. They picked up 3 guys at quarterback, 5 at wide receiver, 6 of them on the offensive line. They're going to switch to a bit of a more air raid system here. They lose 4 of the top 5 pass catchers, not an issue one bit with what they did in the portal. They did lose 3 starters on the O-line, and they lost an impactful reserve player, Luke Condra. You look at Jack Plummer, though. You know, him and Aiden O'Connell split time together a couple years back at Purdue. They ran a bit of a 2 QB system, went to Cal last year, and I expected him to have a big year for the Golden Bears. He certainly did. The offense was the exact same, though. Not really much of his fault. But this is a guy with great experience in Brom's system from the Purdue days. Shows command of the pocket. Has good touch all across the field. 6'5", 215. Really struggled with accuracy. And doesn't have much pure arm talent. The velocity is lacking. Not really a tight window thrower. But the positives he does have, Nick, certainly allow him to thrive in this air raid attack. Not much of an NFL prospect when it comes to showing up at Louisville and putting this offense to good use. I think they have a good player here.
Jack Plummer could be a great quarterback for this air raid offense. Pretty good stats this past season at Cal for Plummer. I really think he didn't have that bad of a season. I highlight him as a potential breakout quarterback this past season for the Golden Bears. Pretty good season, in my opinion, with 3,095 yards, 62.5% complete percentage, 6.9 yards per attempt, 21 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. Good touch across the field. I agree with you. The velocity is lacking. The size is fantastic, 6'5", 215. I think he's in for a big year. I think he can kind of grow in this air raid offense that has potential to really explode here and put up a really solid season. 4,000 passing yards is certainly possible here with that accuracy. Certainly could push the 25 touchdown total mark. This is a very solid quarterback and a good guy to lead this offense as their first-year head coach.
They lose a 1,000-yard pass catcher, Tyler Hudson, a pretty nice tight end in Marshawn Ford. But again, what they did in the portal, Nick, is absolutely ridiculous. Kevin Coleman, a quick player who can make cuts at full speed, good ball skills and hands. He can win in traffic over the middle, 5'11", 170. He was a high-end 4-star recruit, ended up settling with Jackson State. He transfers in here now to Louisville. They picked up an honorable mention All-American in Jamari Thrash. He was an elite playmaker for Georgia State. Jaden Thompson provides plenty of speed as a vertical threat. Jimmy Callaway from Tennessee, he runs a 4.40. Only two notable returnees are Amari Huggins-Bruce and Chris Bell, who's 6'2", 220. Big-time addition in terms of speed for this group. Nick, this receiving core, they're completely revamped. I think this is a phenomenal unit. They picked up a number of transfers here. These guys are all very speedy, impressive talents. I mean, the amount of pure talent and vertical threats they've added in just one off season is absolutely insane. I don't think anyone's given love to what Brahms was able to do in this class, but man, they put it together, and I'm highly impressed.
And great work in the portal here. Kevin Coleman's a fantastic ad, 5'11", 170. I love the size there, great ball skills, fantastic player. Jamari Thrash as well, coming over from Georgia State, very good playmaker. I like what he can do. I think there is so much talent there with Thrash. You know, I kind of throw him in that wide receiver X role. I think he's a really solid piece to have there that can add a whole lot to his offense. Jordan Thompson is, very good at the Y, good vertical threat. Jimmy Callaway, solid player to have. Amari Huggins-Bryce, he's your best returner here. He had 365 yards receiving, 11.8 yards per catch, and 2 scores. Put him in the slot. He's a very good slot piece. Chris Bell returns as well. The size on him is fantastic, 6'2", 220. He had limited action, but he had 105 yards and 15 yards per catch for him. No scores, but Bell, I like him returning. This is a very good group. They've added a lot of pieces from the portal. Brahm walked into campus and started hitting the ground running in the portal. They also brought in some talented freshmen. They have a good freshman recruiting class that includes Jahiel McClain and William Flows as well. There's some seriously talented players here.
Now look at the run game. This is certainly a part of the air raid offense that sometimes gets overlooked. But with Purdue, they certainly gave it an effort. They typically had about 30 rushing attempts per game. But you look at seasons like 2019 and 2021 where they averaged under 3 yards per carry. Just not good enough, Nick. 2022, they had the same commitment, even a little bit more of one, and they're able to put up 3.6 yards per carry. You're not going to be looking at the yards per game numbers or even the touchdowns. That's really not that important. You really just want to see efficiency from the ground game. And they almost did have a 1,000-yard rusher, though, last year at Purdue and Devin McCockabee. And that's something they're going to certainly focus on, I think, this year is trying to find some more effectiveness. You see a lot of inside zone with these air raid offenses. Jawar Jordan, this guy really emerged late in the year. Great speed, tough ball player, good playmaker, even housed a kick return. So I'm interested to see what the running game is going to do this year for this football team, because last year was obviously big for them, but they also had Malik Cunningham, whose threat and skills certainly delivered a lot for them. Travion Cooley does transfer out. So I think Jalen Mitchell also transferred out. So they're certainly not as deep as they once were in the backfield. And Jawar Jordan, a guy that really stepped up last year due to some injuries, very happy with what he was able to produce. And they also picked up Isaac Orendo from Wisconsin. Not really a big fan of his. Never really have been. This backfield certainly does not have a lot of options, Nick, which I think at the same time is kind of good. But the one guy they do have in Jawar Jordan, I think he's going to make an impact one way or another. It would just make no sense if they did get him on the field. So 142 attempts for him last year. Probably going to see around the same number. What are your thoughts on the whole air raid running attack for Jeff Brom that certainly showcased good improvements last year?
Jawar Jordan's a good piece to have, 815 yards on the ground, 5.7 yards to carry, 4 scores for him. It's kind of disappointing, like I mentioned, star Ruben Owens, who ended up decommitting. He would have been great, I think. I know air raid, the scheme doesn't really work, but he is just so much raw talent. I think he would have been a great piece to have. He decommitted once Satterfield left. I think Jordan is a good player to have. He's an experienced runner who's got some good size on him, so I think he's a good piece for this offense at 5'10", 180. But obviously, they're focused on the game and certainly going to try and, I wish they would try and find this balance. I think, we'll see if the Brahms can coach this and kind of find a more balanced offense here. When you have a guy like Jordan, I think he should use his speed and ability, tough player, and hopefully they can get him involved early on.
Look at this offensive line. They certainly were better than a lot of people imagined last season. I think overall this is a really good group. Caleb Chandler departs. He's an elite player for them. Brian Hudson is back at center. This guy quickly comes off the snap with some great hand placement, a powerful interior blocker, great toughness and physicality, 6'4", 310. He's an effective grappler who's got some strong hands. He's been a great leader who's really good in both facets last season, on the ground and through the air. Pass blocking wise, this offensive line was actually quite good, I would say. The lack of passing attack, though, certainly allowed some of those numbers to be jacked up a little bit in terms of like sacks allowed and whatnot. They add Eric Miller, 6'7", 305 from Purdue. He has really struggled. He allowed 22 plus pressures each of his past 2 seasons. Got absolutely hammered versus Michigan. 6 of those pressures came in the Big Ten title game. John Paul Flores, good size of 6'4", 308. Was a solid run blocker a year ago, but not much here other than some versatility for him. Exact same size. And right guard Michael Gonzalez, he was a good pass blocker for the Cardinals a season ago. And Renato Brown, he's a bit bigger at 6'4", 317. He's had his inconsistencies, but was a really stout pass blocker. Overall, I think this is a strong, formidable unit for the Cards, Nick. They do lose 3 highly impactful starters. The guys they're plugging in have experience, and they have a lot of size here. So I'm very interested to see how this size kind of matches with the running game of the air raid. There's a lot to sort out here for this offense. Very excited to see how it works out.
This is a solid offense. It's a good offensive line. I think John Paul Flores is a good add out of the portal. Eric Miller. I need to see a lot more out of him, but I think the left side there, plugging in 2 transfers, kind of concerns me overall, but I think they are 2 talented players and get their act together. They could be solid. Brian Hudson, Michael Gonzalez, very good players to have. Renato Brown at right tackle, like him a lot. He's steady and solid as well. Overall, this is a very good offense. The portal work is fantastic. I do get concerned about plugging in a lot of different guys that have not played together. That always worries me. I like continuity in a team when they return a lot of starters, so certainly kind of worries me a little bit there. But overall, I think Jeff Brom and his son will be able to coach these guys. Brian Brom's a great offensive mind. They could certainly get over the 400 yards per game mark easily this season. I like to see him air the ball out a lot. And they had 26.9 points per game this past season. They can certainly push that to easily 30, 32. This is a very talented offense on paper.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing that needs to improve is the passing game, and it certainly will with ease. So last year, the numbers we saw, we're not really going to compare it to the expectations with this upcoming season because it is completely different with the faces and the scheme they have. A- for me. I like what they have on the O-line in terms of size and the experience. The wide receiver group, I absolutely love what they were able to do, plugging all these pieces together. Very excited to see how it works out. Like what they have in the backfield, even though it's not all that deep. And then Jack Plummer, I think, is the perfect guy to kind of put in charge here as a bridge quarterback into the future for Louisville. Again, A- for me, Nick. Where do you rate this offense?
I think, A- is certainly B+ range is where they belong at this point. This is a very talented team on paper. They made a lot of work in the portal, which certainly, a lot of pieces plugging in kind of worries me a little bit, but overall, I think this is a very talented team on paper, and I think they have a good quarterback in Jack Plummer, nice wide receivers that they return, and I think the offensive line has some holes they got to fill and some guys they got to step up, but overall, this is a good offense.
Now you're looking at the defensive side of the ball. Louisville last year coming into the season, we kind of expected this defense to step up a good bit, but not to the tune of this degree. 11th in points per game. They were 40th against the run. They were top 25 in yards through the air and yards total. They lost 9 guys in the portal, added 10, 5 of them in the secondary. They returned 6 starters. Biggest news here, though, is they had the nation's top pass rush a season ago with 50 of them. But they do lose those players in Yazir Abdullah, Yaya Diaby, Monty Montgomery, the 2 edge rushers. Those guys both had 9 sacks each. Monty was right behind him. He did have double-figure tackle for loss also. So there was a lot of production here from the linebackers and the defensive line. 97 tackles for loss total. This was a great unit for Louisville, mainly because what those guys were able to do up front. You look at the defensive line now, though. Some big shoes to fill by Ashton Gilotti. Expected to step up big here after a really good season for him. He was a nice pass rusher for the Cardinals. Jared Dawson, he was a serviceable defensive tackle at only 6'1", 275. He was a good run defender, though. Desmond Tell wasn't all that good, but is expected to occupy a starting role. Certainly need to see him step up. Jeffrey Clark, he was an above-average player for Georgia State over his career. Isn't consistent, but he can really impact the game with his run defense skills. Tawfiq Thomas wasn't all that good either, but some experienced players on this defensive line overall. And then Stephon Heron, he was always a great pass rusher for an awful Stanford team. His run defense is far from desirable, though. But I think overall this is a pretty serviceable unit, Nick. They're not going to be anywhere near as good as they were last season, especially with now a scheme change. So there's a lot to dice out with this defensive line. But I think overall this unit's not going to be too bad. I think it'll be pretty solid against the run. It's not something I'm really going to worry about on Saturdays.
This is a decent unit. The scheme change worries me a little bit overall. This is a good unit that has some nice production this past season. Gilotti is a good player to have. 24 total tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 7 sacks for him. Dawson, I like him a lot. Serviceable defensive tackle of size. A little undersized, but 16 tackles for him, 3 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks. Desmond Tell, 26 total tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks for him. They made some nice moves, bringing in some pieces from the transfer portal as well. Clark, good player to add from Georgia State. This is a decent unit. I like what this unit has on paper.
Now look at the linebacking core. It's probably the biggest concern with me on this roster. Really weak on this football team in the middle of their defense. Keith Brown, he really struggled as a freshman for Oregon, but the former 4-star did make some waves this past season for the Ducks. Still only had about 200 snaps. TJ Quinn only played a few games. Jalen Alderman, Jackson Hamilton, they don't provide much experience either. There's really just not a whole lot to discuss here, Nick. Other than limited production and playing time. There's some big shoes to fill. Momo Sonogo, Monty Montgomery, those guys depart. They were the top 2 tacklers for this football team a season ago. They also made waves as pass rushers and get into the backfield also. So the amount of production they lose in the middle of their defense is not great. Very concerned for the middle of this defense. The defensive line, even though we consider it a pretty solid unit, they're going to have to play much better considering the deficiencies now in the middle of their defense.
Certainly a lot of production lost at linebacker, which is certainly a problem. Losing a guy like Mohamed Sanogo is a huge loss. Very talented player they lost. Obviously, he made it to the NFL draft. Very talented player overall. Keith Brown, he could be a wild card piece here, coming over from Oregon, had limited snaps there, but he is a good player who could really anchor down that middle linebacker role. Need to see a huge season out of him. I look at other guys like TJ Quinn, only played in a few games. He had 18 total tackles, though. Jackson Hamilton did not play a whole lot with 4 total tackles in limited appearances. Overall, this linebacker unit is certainly the weakest part of this team overall, and they have a lot to prove.
Now you look at the star position, it's more of a hybrid, safety outside linebacking position in the defense. Benjamin Perry, he's looking to anchor that position. Thought he did pretty solid last year as a versatile player. Gilbert Frierson, he was really good in that role in Miami. Likely to see these two rotate, which I think is highly beneficial when you have two similar assets that can play in these kind of unique positions that you have on your defense. The rest of the safety group, when you look at the secondary, has plenty of options. MJ Griffin was a good run defender, was highly impressive in coverage. He really helped limit the big plays of his insertion into the lineup. Has versatility, can play in the box also. Josh Minkins, he struggled with durability, got a lot of snaps last year though. Can also play anywhere, but needs to improve his play in all areas. Devin Neal comes from Baylor. He was a great run stopper. And then Cameron Kelly, 1,800 plus snaps at UNC, 6'2", 210. Plenty of options at safety. You look at corner. Keetro Clark, he was one of the best corners probably in school history. He departs. Jarvis Brownlee, though, he was a great performer in his own right. Certainly an overlooked player. Was a good run stopper. Was a sturdy tackler. Very sound in coverage. A lot of expectations for him. He should be a first-team all-conference performer this year. Quincy Riley was really good in coverage. He's going to compete with Storm Duck, who was an inconsistent player, but typically a good overall player for North Carolina. Marquise Groves-Killebrew, Marcus Washington from Texas A&M and Georgia, respectively. Both former high-end recruits. Really high upside in the secondary, Nick. They've taken some big strides, at least under Scott Satterfield, and I expect Ron English to have these guys tuned up.
This is a good unit, high upside unit, certainly. Ben Perry, I like him at that star role. Good player, 43 total tackles, 1 tackle for loss for him in limited appearances. Brownlee is a fantastic piece, very underrated in the secondary. 6 total tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, 2 interceptions, 12 pass breakups. Those numbers are quite nice for him. Josh Minkins, he's a good player with 55 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, a sack, interception, 3 pass breakups. I like him a lot. Griffin as well, 45 total tackles for him, 2 interceptions, a pass breakup. Good player to have. Storm Duck, he has a lot of potential, right? Certainly want to see what he can do out of him. Very good player, but inconsistent during his time at UNC. He's a talented player, though. They get a lot out of him. Marcus Washington from A&M, too, another guy that's very important to look at. I think there's a lot of talent out of that duo with him and Groves-Killebrew coming over from 2 SEC programs. This is a good secondary, a lot of high upside. They were pretty good unit overall. I think they could certainly improve. They weren't the worst in the world, but they could certainly find a way to improve. 22nd in the nation is a pretty good number. I can see them get this year. This is a good unit. I like the coaching they brought over and bringing in a new defensive coordinator, Ron English from Purdue, who's worked with Jeff Brom. I think this is a good unit overall.
His defense overall last season was actually really good. I'm going to go with B+, though. The linebacking core is an uphill climb. Needs to establish some presence in the middle. But I think they were well coordinated, though, last year. They get plenty of coverage sacks. Then you get plenty of sacks from your defensive ends or your outside linebackers who would certainly assist the secondary when they needed it. Well-coordinated unit, Nick. It's hard to expect the same from this unit this upcoming season, especially with all these moving parts. But I do think the secondary, much like the receiving core, all these new faces, along with some of the returning talent they have, a lot to digest here. But I think this is a good unit that's certainly going to be just as good as what Purdue had. Their defense over the last couple of years was certainly a much improved unit in terms of giving up yards and efficiency. Was not a bad unit one bit. Certainly struggled against some of the tougher opponents, but I think for what the program had in terms of expectations, they played very well. B+ for me, a bit of a step back. Not really sure how big it will be, but I think it's going to be more than serviceable for Louisville as a whole.
It would be tough to live up to the 11th in the nation, 19.2 points per game given up this past season, considering the loss. This is a good unit. They certainly won't live up to that hype, but overall, I like this unit. The secondary is solid, and they can certainly be a good defense.
Now, in the schedule preview and prediction, Louisville struck gold this offseason. Satterfield's odd departure leads to homegrown Brahms taking the job, brings an effective, efficient scheme with him on offense, and has a boatload of talent to work with, a big offensive line, familiar face under center, following a big-time offseason transfer portal class. The defense was a good unit for this football team. They'll look to stay respectable in the ACC. A massive portal class overall on both sides of the ball gives this team some great opportunities right away in a pretty wide-open conference. 2 of the first 3 games come at neutral site domes, Nick. Certainly a hidden benefit that I think will help this passing attack, establish chemistry a tad faster because they do play Georgia Tech in Indiana in Atlanta and Indianapolis, respectively. What are your thoughts on this team overall? I do have them losing the back 2 games of the first half of the year and the final 2 games of the last half of the year. I definitely think the game against Duke could go either way. Love the Blue Devils. 8-4 for me. I think they can certainly steal a couple of these games they lose. This is a wide open conference, but I also want to be conservative here. Again, the hidden aspect of the domes, though, I think is something that's going to be really important for trying to get these guys in tune.
A little bit of a rare difference for me. I'm going to go 7-5. I think they are going to lose to Duke as well. I think there's just too much talent for Duke not to win that game. I know it is on the road in Louisville, so it certainly does have a bit of a challenge for the Blue Devils, and I think that it certainly could win that game. But I'm going to go 7-5, be a little more careful here. This is a good unit overall. The team is good. I like the coaching staff. They sort of found their way into a really solid coaching staff when things looked bad when Satterfield bolted for Cincinnati, which I thought was an odd move for him considering the program that he was building in Louisville. I mean, the recruiting had gotten a lot better, and they really kind of started to put their foot in the door in the ACC, and they've built a really great foundation here. And now Braum takes over and really can lead this program to a solid position in the conference, considering, like you said, the ACC is wide open this year. I'll be a little more careful, though. I'm going to go 7-5. I think that's just a better expectation for me in year one. But they could certainly beat Kentucky at home. They're going to beat Duke at home. They could beat Notre Dame at home, even potentially overall. So I think they got a good rate schedule here. I mean, the home away splits are not bad. Yeah, at Miami's tough. At Pitt might give them a little bit of trouble. At North Carolina State could be a little difficult as well. They could certainly win that game. Playing 2 neutral site games against Georgia Tech, Indiana is very nice. Kind of controls the crowds there. Certainly, like you said, the dome aspect helps the passing attack as this air raid kind of looks to get into those stride and hit that full running stride in the season. This is a good team, and I think Braum was a fantastic hire in this program. We'll be in a really good spot in the ACC in the next 2-3 years. I'll just be a little more careful this year. I'm going to go 7-5.
Yeah, over-under 8. I'm going to stay away from that. But I think there's a lot of upside here. Wouldn't be shocked one bit if they found their way to Charlotte at the end of the season. A lot of talent to go around. So it's really hard to pick this team to go 7 or 8 wins because I do love the talent. But at the end of the day, you got to be realistic here. Hoping for the best for Braum and this crew. Appreciate you joining me, Nick.
Absolutely.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.